analysis of the geopolitical territorial conflicts of 3 different extraterrestrial civilizations on this planet, and punctuated that sentence with, "and they don't get along." And then he said, "We have proof that 2 of those 3 have been interacting with and terraforming this planet for more than 270 million years. And I said, "That's before the time of the dinosaurs." And he said, "Linda, they made the dinosaurs." And then he said, "What we're trying to figure out is what is the truth about 65 million years ago? Did the extraterrestrials deliberately take out the dinosaurs? Or was it really an asteroid that slammed into what is the Chicxulub crater down in the Gulf?" Meaning, he was saying to me that the government, we don't trust the government doesn't trust the ETs. They don't know precisely what is exactly truth, but he said that they had evidence that the terraforming was 270 million years. Let's just assume for the rest of this presentation that that is true. Then it means that you and I and 7 billion others on this planet are just the latest model in a gigantic history of extraterrestrial interaction with this planet that could have meant Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, and on, that there would be levels of civilizations that we don't know anything about and have never yet encountered. And why Göbekli Tepe is so important is that it is the very first time that we've gotten to 12,000 years in careful carbon dating of a site that is as sophisticated as Göbekli Tepe without a single tool, not a sign of habitation, on a rural hill that had to have been built for some sort of reason. So the DIA guy said to me, and you might as well think about us, Homo sapien, as the 37th model of a Hoover vacuum cleaner. And he said, we are really truly trying to understand. Neanderthal never knew it was being replaced by Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien. None of the other preceding primates knew that they were being replaced by the successive. What is the future of Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien? Do we have an ally, or as Enlil Enki, Zeus versus the Titans, the abductees in Pennsylvania? Over and over comes this theme. There are life forms that have been terraforming this earth and made Homo sapien sapien and Neanderthalensis and these other primates. And they think, one group thinks, that we are less, this is a quote, we are less than a roach because a roach evolved in a life form out of DNA without any interaction by extraterrestrials. And that there is a group that feels anything that they have made, which goes back very much to Sitchin's Enlil versus Enki. It was Enlil who said, we made them. They are our workers. I want them erased. Enki says no. Prometheus in the Titans says no. Prometheus, for some reason, felt that there was some vested interest and reason for humanity to survive. Is that the big issue hanging over this planet by conflicting geopolitical, territorial issues of extraterrestrials? Just keep this in mind as we keep going forward. This is how complicated this 16-layer chess game is. Cro-Magnon Homo sapien. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien, the skull on the right, overlapped with Homo neanderthalensis 35,000 years ago. And I remember at various times hearing about a telepathic hive mind civilization that harvested sperm and egg genetic material from Earth in order to produce cloned biological body containers, but for what purpose? The first time that someone tried to put the baffling puzzle pieces together for me in a more coherent picture was in October 1983, when I was still trying to go forward with the HBO project in spite of government efforts to block me. A Washington, D.C. military source who claimed firsthand interaction with at least one type of non-human agreed to talk with me completely off the record about the type that he knew as extraterrestrial biological entities that he called EBINs. He was aware that on April 9th, 1983, at Kirtland Air Force Base, that I had been shown the alleged briefing document for an unnamed U.S. president. He said that this quote that he knew that I had now made in some places, he said these extraterrestrial biological entities did manipulate DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien. He was saying that's absolutely true. That was a true part of the document you were shown at Kirtland. The military source stressed that no one in the American government with access to that knowledge ever wanted to be alive if or when such an announcement were broadcast to the world that humans are someone else's experimental androids. He told me that he had talked firsthand with a U.S. Air Force captain who received telepathic communication from one non-human at a crash site in the Roswell region in 1949. It's 2 years after the 47 events. Because the captain, more than anyone else at the crash site, could clearly receive and correctly hear the telepathic thoughts from a being that was lying hurt on the ground, that captain was assigned at the spot to travel with this entity that they took up off the ground who was alive. And it's very interesting. I will just give you this detail. Try to imagine this, because this was described to me by a man who knew this captain very well. He said, by then, by 49, this was a common drill. The United States government had gone through several retrievals, bodies, and craft. So this was get in, get out, sanitize the scene, doesn't exist. That's why they were there. They're looking at a partially hurt craft. They can see, I believe it was 4 bodies that were clearly dead on the ground, with lots of tumbleweeds and rocks, and something had come up whenever this event occurred. And all he was doing, he was walking toward the craft, when what went through his mind, the way it was described to me, was a cry of agony. He heard it in his mind. He saw all kinds of images, as if he was looking out a window and there were rocks and everything, like he saw, he was made to see like a moving film in his mind, the crash. And then he felt the scream again. He could feel pain. All of this was happening in his mind in a few seconds. Pain, agony, what was happening. And his eyes are drawn to what seems to be the direction of something. And in all of this debris, he sees these 2 eyes that move. And it was a live being that was hurt. And they got it up, and he got the assignment that he was to stay with this being at Los Alamos for the foreseeable future, because he could get all of this stuff in his mind. And this is something that you will hear from anybody who has investigated any of the abduction cases. There are people who have said that when they were children in school in the United States in the 50s and 60s, that they had special tests in school where people from the government would come and say that they were assessing something for a new school program. And they would be put through a series where flashes of images would be coming at them, and they're being watched by these federal people, allegedly for some new school program. But what was really going on, Whitley Strieber has also written about this, is that our government was looking for what they called translators. They wanted to find people who had this ability to get the clearest transmission of telepathic, not just the thought words, but the emotion, the images, and often when the movies come flying through the mind in relationship to non-human telepathic communication, overlaying, like on top of the movie, are three-dimensional gold symbols that many people in the abduction syndrome say look like Egyptian hieroglyphs. This is a very complex download into human minds, and apparently there are not many humans who can do it. So, this man that I had this meeting with in Washington knew great details about this case. And he said that during the 3 years that the being was at Los Alamos, and the briefing paper that I was shown at Kirtland said, in 1949, a being was retrieved, was taken to Los Alamos, and died on June 18, 1952, of unknown causes. This man knew all about this, and he said that the Air Force captain, they had 16-millimeter film sessions with him, sometimes daily, sometimes every other day, depending on what was going on, to get the captain's English of what was coming into his head from this Eben at Los Alamos, and that they interviewed, quote unquote, through the captain about physics, astronomy, the Earth's history, the planet, the source. And he said, someday, Linda, someday, a lot of us hope that everyone on the planet will see all of those films. We at least did an archive. And this is one of the quotes that this man told me was directly from the captain from this Eben at Los Alamos. Quote, "We made you, we put you here, but you have to live it." Close quote. I typed up notes after the October 18, 1983 meeting that began with the military source talking about information gained from what they called EBA 1, and another captured being called EBA 2. And here are some brief excerpts from my October 1983 notes in Washington, D.C. EBA 2, trying to teach human scientists about their Eben technology. They use a completely different set of physical laws than ours. Our physics would not apply in their civilization, but theirs can apply in ours. The Ebens travel interdimensionally, many times faster than the speed of light, like the corner of a napkin folded to its opposite corner. There are many dimensions, 2 of which we might relate to, but at least a dozen we would not relate to. And I'm going to pause here to tell you one of the most interesting insights from a scientist, very successful, had a multi-million-dollar lab in New Jersey. The year was around 1982. He was a Bud Hopkins case, never written about, never shown. He never wanted anybody to know. He was considered a sort of a genius at age 32, 33, he had all this success. And he and his family celebrate his 33rd birthday in New York City. They are driving out of Manhattan, midnight or 1 o'clock, and there's a place for those of you who know, as you come out of Manhattan, there are roads that will go off sort of the Hoboken direction. There's a branch that goes into a side road, and then there's the big main drag that goes south through New Jersey. That's where they were headed. So they're getting right to that branch. It's late enough that they aren't overcrowded by cars, but that section of road, 24/7, 365, is pretty crowded. And they all see a blinking red light in the sky. And the father who is driving the car, the son, genius, is in the passenger seat. His mom and his sister and her husband are in the back. And the father says, "When did they put a revolving restaurant out here?" And the son says, with the reality check clarity of the left brain that he had, Dad, that is not a restaurant, that is high in the sky. And the father resists and said, no, it's got to be one of those revolving restaurants like they have in Seattle. And the son says, Dad, pull over. And as the car pulls over onto the shoulder, simultaneously, all of this happened at once. It takes time. The son sees one part of him moved through the window and is completely aware that his body is in that seat. He had what he would ever call it, he was separated into two parts instantly and aware of both, and became aware that his dad was in a suspended animation. And as he comes up through the window and he arcs up, he said, in that state of what was moving, I was moving toward that red flashing light. But my mind thought, oh, what's happening at the car? He's now looking at the car from whatever state he's in. He sees his body in the passenger seat. He sees his dad suspended at the steering wheel. He cannot see his mom and sister and her husband in the back. He thinks about the red light again. He's moving and coming. So from his point of view, in that state, thought is moving you in whichever direction a thought comes instantly. So he gets up above that red flashing light. And he said he realized suddenly, from whatever state he was in, that the red pulsing light had this huge black donut. To him it looked like a donut. And then he felt pulled down. And I've seen the videotape that Bud Hopkins did of this session. And Bud had a sofa on a wall where he would have people that he was working with. And this scientist on the videotape was laid out like normally people would. And when he starts down into this donut, he begins screaming at the top of his lungs, and he's pulling his legs and kicking and kicking. And I asked him, what in your mind, do you remember anything about why are you kicking? He said, Linda, I'm looking down and here are 12, I believe that was 12, sets of black eyes all in a circle, and I am coming right down in the middle of them, and I was trying with every fiber of my being to break and stop and go back up. And he said, you know, I could think myself to look at the car, I could think myself to go to the red lights, but I couldn't think myself as desperately as I was trying to stop and go the other way. And so he came down in the middle of all these black eyes. And as many abduction cases, he doesn't have linear memory. The next thing is on a table. And he's lying there and he sees the big black eyes and a gray of some sort. Might have been an ebon, but it's very uncertain because there's so many different types of grays. And he sees the four fingers, these two long ones, and this clasp around what he said looked to him like his electric toothbrush. But coming out of the bottom was a cerulean blue light, which is sort of bluish green. And the hand appears to be moving slowly, and this guy had already started getting into Buddhism, and he was doing meditation and all kinds of things. He'd already been doing that in his life. And so part of him said, in his mind, if you concentrate everything you've got on your muscles and your nerves, you can move your arms. And he said, I did that. And Linda, this is the power of the mind, of the being, against everything. And he was strong. He was a strong guy. Everything, my hands came down under that force of that being, and I made a circle right over my heart, and the being continued and touched me above my heart with that instrument. And he remembered a pain like a shock, like when you would touch an electric fence. That's what he felt. Bang. Very next memory, he's in his bed, in their house, in New Jersey. Doesn't understand. There are leaves on the floor. He's fully dressed. He's got his shoes on, in bed. They've got leaves on them. He gets up, he calls, he was living with his mom and dad. He called their names. Nobody was there. He's completely disoriented. He walked out, went to the front door, went out on the steps, went out on the walk that they had to a sidewalk. And then when he got to the sidewalk, he said, Linda, I began to walk fast. And I haven't ever told anybody. I didn't tell my parents. I'm telling you. I had been having chest pains for a year, and I didn't want to go to a doctor. And I had not been able to run. I had not been able to play tennis without my heart hurting. And he said, I know it's stupid, but I didn't want a doctor to tell me that at age 32 I had heart problems. And as I began to walk faster and faster, knowing that I had not been able to walk like this for at least a year, I began to run. I ran for 2 or 3 blocks. Linda, no pain. They fixed my heart. Why? It's like almost you could take all of the abduction cases of all the years to that plea. And in there, sharing that with you is inherently a repair which comes up in some of the abduction cases. There are other human repairs. If we go into this work and the sharing publicly and we are painting everything black and frightening and negative, it may be completely wrong. If we paint everything wonderful and angelic and peaceful, we can be very wrong. That there is a big rainbow of various pieces here, and that's what I want to leave you tonight. I think I'm supposed to end. Am I supposed to go to 9:30? Okay, I can keep going. But I think it's important because a lot of people this weekend have said, you're trying to report facts, and I am, in a subject that is almost impossible to get, reality check facts. And everybody wants to know, myself included, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it in between? Are we going to be eliminated? Are we going to have a future? All of these questions that are subconsciously or consciously in human minds about all of this. And as I go, continue to go this next half hour in the hybrids on Monday, I want you to know that it is my own personal effort. This is what is fueling me, is trying to understand the answers to these questions. And that I just shared with you one of several that I know about personally where human beings have had some sort of a major problem, medical problem, and they have been healed. In this case, this scientist who I've always been in contact with, extraordinary information has come to this man. He has his own lab. He's working in a part of the world he may or may not make the breakthrough that he wants in extraterrestrial technology. But nevertheless, he has come to the conclusion that those beings that dealt with him wanted him to continue to try to develop one of their technologies. You could argue that it may be self-serving for the non-humans in a way that we can't comprehend. Or it could be that the makers of Homo sapien, the genetically manipulated primates, that in the experimentation or the self-serving use of creating these different Hoover vacuum cleaners, that the beings themselves have reached a point where they want this more intelligent and very creative life form to stand on its own 2 feet. And for us to do that, we have to know the truth. I am convinced that continuing on a planet where there are policies of lies, both from the government and from the ETs, is just weakening us. And so I'm going to continue with this presentation into some difficult material, and I will continue it on Monday. But I just want you to know that I have no hard evidence in any way of whether the Ebens, the standing up alligators, all of the various talls want to help us, want to hurt us, or are neutral. And indifference to the plights of the earth could also end up being negative. The agendas of these beings, I'm laying out the taxonomy to try to show you how complex it is. The agendas behind each of these types is what we really need to know. If the government is confused, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, now continuing with this Washington discussion. He said, in number 3, all Ebens look alike. The society on their planet, supposed to be in the Zeta Reticuli binary solar system, about 39 light years from Earth. This seems to be a constant theme from Betty and Barney Hill on through to this day. That it is worldwide and their leaders are for life. But every Eben has a different personality, and I wrote in my notebook, question mark, question mark. 4, the Ebens brought 5 different humanoid species. Are they juvenile delinquents? Question mark. This is a question that he raised. These are my notes from his discussion. To this planet Earth a long time ago. Our whole planet is a sociological experiment. That's why the Ebens persist in the guardian role versus the renegade blonde Swedes and others. He was defining, when I had this meeting in 1983, interestingly enough, he said the Swedes, the Nordics, were troublemakers to our government. Others would argue that the Nordics, the Swedes, may be the only allies that we have. Again, the layers of contradictions are huge. The problem is, if the Ebens go away from Earth, what will happen? They have a computer base in our moon, which was the whole Brian Scott case, was about our moon is artificial, was placed, the whole thing of solar eclipses was planned, and that inside of the moon are alien computers that are monitoring and absorbing information from this planet always. They have a computer base in our moon and throughout our solar system. Is that sufficient monitoring to keep the blonde Swedes in check? Remember, this was the government slant in 1983, that the Nordics were the troublemakers and the Ebens were our friends. He said that the Swedes, quote, have all of their menagerie of cloned biological entities, which was changed later as we kept evolving in time to the Ebens making all of the menagerie of the grays, and that the blondes are in some sort of an alliance with these other tall humanoids that would not be cloned, allegedly would not be a cloned menagerie. He said about the presidents of the United States. Truman, 1945 to 1953, knew everything at the time. Ike, 1953 to 1961, knew but put the lid on. Kennedy, 1961 to 63, wanted to tell the world and was killed for it on November 22nd, 1963. There's much that I could tell you that I have learned privately. I do think that this was a United States inside decision by people trying to ride the difficult extraterrestrial story, and they felt that a president of the United States was a bigger national security threat than his life, and that he was murdered to keep the extraterrestrial story away from the public that Kennedy wanted to share. And remember, it was Robert Kennedy who has the famous quote, he wanted to shred the Central